Hello, this is Vivian Young with 1000 Friends of Florida, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Planning for Sea Level Rise, State Resources for Florida's Communities. I think we've got a great set of speakers lined up for you today. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping first. 1000 Friends of Florida, for those of you who don't know, was founded in 1986, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit membership organization. We focus on planning strategies to save special places and build better communities throughout Florida. We'd like to stay in contact with you. We have the link here to sign up for our email alerts so that you can get information on upcoming webinars. We also are a membership organization, and we encourage you to consider joining us. And we're also on Facebook and Twitter, and hope you'll follow us on those sites as well. First of all, we'd like to thank our webinar sponsors. Our major sponsors include the Archibald Foundation and Mosaic. We'd also like to thank Cobb and Cole, the Perkins Charitable Foundation, the William Howard Flowers Jr. Foundation, and our sponsors, the American Planning Association Florida Chapter, Ron Book, Dover Cole & Partners, Kitson Evergreen, and Thompson Brock Luger and Company. I wanted to let you know that we do have a full slate of webinars in the planning process. Registration is now open for our October 8th and November 12th webinars. October 8th is another one on sea level rise, and what we're doing is focusing on all the strategies being used in Broward County from the regional level, county level, and local level to address sea level rise. And then on November 12th, we have Planning for Complete Streets in Florida. Billy Hadaway with the Florida Department of Transportation heads up the state effort, and he's going to be talking about state strategies. And then we have some local planning initiatives that we're highlighting as well. We have our remaining webinars for December through March confirmed, but we don't have all the details worked out yet. So in the next couple of weeks, we'll be starting to add the link so you can register for those webinars as well. I did want to let you know 1000 Friends is doing a sea level rise survey right now. We're trying to find out what activities are currently going on in communities around the state. So if you haven't had a chance to do that yet, you can go to surveymonkey.com/s/Florida Sea Level, and we just have a brief 10-question survey. We will be posting the results on our website and sharing them via email alert, and we're just trying to find out what communities are currently doing around the state that we may not be aware of. In terms of this webinar, it has been approved for 2 AICP CM for planners, 2 contact hours for certified environmental health professionals, 1 CEC for certified floodplain managers, and CLE for Florida attorneys. We're pleased to be able to offer these credits as we know a lot of our participants like to take advantage of them. Again, a little bit more housekeeping. You have a control panel which looks something like this that allows you to operate the webinar from your end. I want to draw your attention to a couple of different things. You see these little plus signs. If you click on them, it maximizes it. The chat box right here is where you can ask us questions. So you need to click on the little plus sign to optimize the chat box and type your message in. You can either send it to the entire audience, or you can click this icon here and just send it to the organizers, whichever you prefer to do. The other thing I wanted to mention is on materials. If you maximize that, click on the plus sign, we do have links to today's PowerPoint presentation, as well as a link to a site that Crystal Goodison from UF Geoplan Center is going to be talking about regarding sea level rise, so you can click on those to get more information. We have had people request that we do our PowerPoints with a white background. I ran out of time to do that this time, but in the future we will, so that if you're printing them out, you won't waste as much ink, but I apologize we weren't able to do that for this one. In terms of questions, if you could refer to the slide number and or speaker when you post your question, please keep your questions succinct. I will ask the questions of the presenters at the very end as time permits. And after the webinar, you'll get a brief survey link in your email. And we really would appreciate it if you would give us feedback on this webinar. We really do take it to heart what input you give us. Hold on just a second. Let me turn it over to Charles Pattison, who is going to be introducing our presenters. Charles, are you on the line?
Yeah, thanks, Vivian. This is Charles Pattison. I'm the policy director here at Thousand Friends of Florida, and I think you'll find this to be a very interesting program today. And as Vivian said earlier, we also have 2 additional Sea Level Rise webinars coming in the future. I'm going to introduce our speakers in the order that they will be presenting. First is Dan Fitzpatrick. He's responsible for coordinating the Department of Economic Opportunities Community Resiliency Initiative. That's a 5-year project to integrate adaptation for sea level rise into current planning programs, including local comp plans, local hazard mitigation plans, and post-disaster plans. There's a large focus group that he has set up to advise on the programs, and he will be focusing his work primarily on hazard mitigation, flood resilient construction practices, flood insurance education, urban planning education, geographic technology education, and environmental analysis. Dan holds graduate degrees in urban regional planning and environmental geography, and he's taught undergraduate coursework at Bryn Mawr, Florida State, and Westchester University. Following him will be Crystal Goodison. She's the project manager at the University of Florida's GeoPlan Center. That's a GIS research center within the Department of Urban and Regional Planning. She has 15 years experience with GIS programs, database administration, data management, and creation of decision support tools for environmental and transportation planning. She has a BA and MA from the University of Florida in Urban Planning, and she also currently serves as the chair of the Gainesville City Planning Board. Next, we'll have Tom Beck. He's currently serving as the director of the Office of Water Policy at DEP. He's joined with Mara Berger, the DEP Communications Office. Tom's primary responsibility is working with water management districts on consistency with state requirements for a consumptive use permitting program and establishing minimum flows and levels for water bodies statewide. That office also has review responsibility for district regional water supply plans and their 5-year water resource development work program. I believe preparing currently an annual report on regional water supply planning for Florida. Tom has a PhD from FSU and did his undergrad work at Vanderbilt. And next will be Meredith Jagger. She's an environmental epidemiologist focusing on climate-sensitive diseases and health adaptation planning for the Department of Health. She currently manages the Building Resilience Against Climate Effects program, acronym is BRACE. She also has professional experience working in HIV and chronic disease surveillance. She has an MS in environmental science from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga and is currently pursuing an MPH degree in disaster management and humanitarian relief from the University of South Florida. And I believe that will be our speaker lineup. So, Vivian, I'm going to turn it back to you, and we'll begin with Dan Fitzpatrick.
Dan, we're ready for you to start your presentation if you're on the line.
First slide, please. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Dan Fitzpatrick, and I'm responsible for coordinating the Department of Economic Opportunities Community Resiliency Initiative. During my allotted period of time this afternoon, I will provide a background on the Community Resiliency Initiative, an overview of the initiative's scope of work, and achievements to date. Next slide, please. The Community Resiliency Initiative is funded through a generous grant agreement through NOAA and the Florida Coastal Office of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Previous projects DEO has focused on include the Waterfront Florida Program and the Post-Disaster Redevelopment Program. Next slide, please. The primary goal of the Post-Disaster Redevelopment Planning Initiative was to develop guidance and provide technical assistance to Florida communities for planning for long-term disaster recovery prior to coastal hazard events to ensure that each community is able to recover faster, more efficiently, and maintain local control over recovery efforts and take advantage of opportunities to build back more resiliently. In the last year of the Post-Disaster Planning Initiative, and at the request of the pilot communities, DEO began to explore how to incorporate sea level rise into post-disaster redevelopment planning processes. This was because the pilot communities identified that impacts from storm surge were closely related to the impacts associated with sea level rise, and similar mitigation approaches could be implemented for both types of coastal hazards. Based on continued interest to prioritize sea level rise as a concern in the local government planning processes, the Community Resiliency Initiative was started during the fiscal year 2011-2012. Next slide, please. In year one of the initiative, we focused on partnership building and information gathering. In year two, we developed preliminary guidance on adaptation planning, and all these guidance materials are now available on the department's website. Also in year two, DEO started the Adaptation Action Area Pilot Project with the South Florida Regional Planning Council, Broward County, and the City of Fort Lauderdale. I will discuss this project near the end of my presentation today. We are currently finishing up projects from year three and starting on work for year four. For the remainder of the project, we will work with 3 pilot communities to develop adaptation planning case studies and guidance materials. And over the next 2 years, we will continue to create guidance materials that reflect the lessons learned through our research and work with local governments. Next slide, please. At the beginning of the initiative, department staff began partnership building and formed the initiative's focus group of statewide stakeholders and experts on adaptation and coastal vulnerability. The focus group formulated the initiative's 5 major goals, and of these goals, the following the lead of local governments, providing technical assistance in ways that are most helpful to local governments rose to the top of our priority list. The majority of guidance that has been prepared to date on this initiative has evolved from the work of communities that have already started to address adaptation, and this will continue to be true as DEO moves forward on working with our 3 pilot communities through the documentation of processes and choices made by each pilot community. The next couple of slides are very important. These are the focus group members that have helped to shape the original goals and products of the initiative. And these focus group members include local government representatives, regional government representatives, state government agencies, federal government partners, private sector and non-for-profit organizations, and our university partners. This original list of focus group members has expanded since the initiative has started, and we continue to build new partnerships every day. As highlighted at the beginning of my presentation, in year 2 of the initiative, DEO started an Adaptation Action Area Pilot Project with the South Florida Regional Planning Council, Broward County, and the City of Fort Lauderdale. The pilot project was a definition for adaptation action areas being adopted in the Florida statutes in 2011, along with optional requirements for their implementation. When the definition and statute were adopted, the department received a question from communities around the state: what is an adaptation action area? An adaptation action area is an optional comprehensive planning designation for areas that experience coastal flooding and that are vulnerable to the related impacts of rising sea levels, for the purpose of prioritizing funding for infrastructure needs and adaptation planning. Local governments that adopt an adaptation action area may consider policies within their coastal management element of the comprehensive plans in order to improve resiliency to coastal flooding. Next slide. The statute provides some good criteria, but also a great deal of flexibility to communities that choose to pursue the use of action areas. Next slide, please. In the project of special merit, department staff attempted to explore the question, what is an adaptation action area? Since communities in South Florida spearheaded efforts for developing and guiding the language for adaptation action areas through the legislative process, it made sense that DEO would work with the South Florida Regional Planning Council to explore this question. At the beginning of the pilot project, DEO staff looked at every option underneath the sun in order to identify all the available uses for action areas. From this research effort, the City of Fort Lauderdale was able to select the adaptation language that met the city's goals, and the city is currently in the final process of adopting action area language into the city's comprehensive plan. From this project, a case study, an adaptation action area guidebook, and several short podcast videos will be completed early next year, and all these resources will be available on the department's website in the future, which is listed on the next slide. In conclusion, Florida's local governments have and will continue to provide adaptation leadership for other communities around the state, region, nation, and globe. Through identifying new approaches and available adaptation opportunities, Florida's communities are preparing for a resilient future. If your community has any adaptation activities planned or underway, I would appreciate it if you reach out to me and provide an overview of the activity and any lessons learned to date. We'd love to have your help as we continue to shape adaptation guidance for communities across the state. Thank you. The next speaker is Crystal Goodson.
Thanks, Dan. Vivian, do you want to pass over control? Okay, can everyone hear me and see my screen? Okay. Good afternoon, I'm Crystal Goodison. I'm from the University of Florida Geoplan Center, and I'm here today to talk about a continuing project that our center is working on with the Florida Department of Transportation. In this project, we developed a GIS planning tool to help identify transportation infrastructure potentially vulnerable to the effects of sea level rise. And in our continuing efforts, we're working to improve the initial data and tools we created so that others can utilize this information in their sea level rise and adaptation planning. I want to start off with this image of A1A in Fort Lauderdale during Hurricane Sandy in October 2012. I think this has kind of become a famous example where storm surge from the hurricane pushed onto the stretcher roadway, dumping sand and water along it and closing it to traffic. And this is just one example of how vulnerable Florida's roadways, population, and communities are to flooding and storm surge. We've got miles of low elevation roadways and communities which are close to the ocean and coupled with low elevations that extend miles inland. Now, Hurricane Sandy was a superstorm, but as the sea level continues to rise, that raises the ocean levels from which the storm surge pushes onto the land. And sea levels in Florida have already risen about 8 inches since 1900, and they're continuing to rise about an inch per decade. So in a state as flat as ours, every inch really counts. So from a transportation perspective, this is significant. Our economy is greatly linked to our transportation system. It's essential for getting people to work, moving goods and freight, the tourism sector, and just mobility in our communities. In November of last year, Climate Central published a report finding that floods rising 3 feet above the high tide line at Key West are near certain under any sea level rise scenario this century. And when we look at what's less than 3 feet above the high tide line, we find over 2,100 square miles of land, nearly 500 million people, 156 billion in property value, 300,000 homes, and over 2,500 miles of roadway. Now, just a little brief overview of some policy background on climate change in the state as it relates to transportation planning. First, there was a few policy recommendations included in Florida's Energy and Climate Change Action Plan that was developed by Governor Christ's action team on energy and climate change in 2008. In particular, the plan included the following policy recommendations in regards to transportation. One, that we address adaptation in the state's long-range transportation plan. 2, that we work cooperatively with agencies and partners to coordinate adaptation efforts. And 3, that we inventory critical transportation facilities at risk to climate change. Next, the Florida Transportation Plan, or the FTP, is the state's long-term vision for meeting transportation needs over the next 50 years. And then the 2060 Florida Transportation Plan, which was finalized in 2010, there are some clear directives on how to start looking at incorporating climate change into the planning process. Specifically, the recommendation was to develop refined data and decision-making tools to better integrate climate trends and their impacts into decisions about designing, constructing, maintaining, and operating transportation facilities. So following that, the Department of Transportation partnered with Florida Atlantic University to research the various methods, models, projections that were being used in Florida to calculate sea level rise. And FAU released a comprehensive report detailing what was being done in Florida, and then they gave recommendations on how the department should move forward if they choose to incorporate sea level rise projections into their long-range planning. In particular, 2 key recommendations were, 1, to apply the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers methodology to develop statewide and regional projections of sea level rise, and 2, to develop a sketch planning tool to identify potentially vulnerable infrastructure. Now, the Corps' method was developed with NOAA and the USGS, and it uses projections of sea level rise adapted from the National Research Council. It also incorporates regional tide gauge data for calculations of relative sea level rise versus simply using those global rates of sea level rise. The Corps also recommends the use of scenarios in order to look at various rates of sea level rise when doing planning. And also, very importantly, others in Florida are converging on using the Corps method. And in particular, the Southeast Climate Compact has been recommending use of the Corps method. So there's a lot of consensus in Florida around using the Corps method. So for GeoPlan's scope of work, our first scope of work really was intended to implement those 2 recommendations from the FAU report. And that's what we focused on in phase 1 of our research, which we completed last October. And now we're moving into a second phase of our research, where we're trying to improve what we've created. Today, I'm primarily going to talk about the work we completed in phase 1, and I'll briefly go over what we're doing for phase 2. So our phase 1 goals were map inundation. So where and when is inundation projected to occur in Florida, using those projections from the Corps, and doing it for every decade from 1992 to 2100. And our second goal was to develop a planning tool to facilitate identification of vulnerable infrastructure. So I quickly want to give a shout out to our great team who's worked on this project. Maria Cahill is our project manager from FDOT's Office of Policy Planning, and she's really been a leader in pursuing research in this arena. And from our center, Alexi Thomas and Dr. Russ Watkins really got this project going off the ground in phase 1. And since then, every full-time staff in our office has really contributed to this project. So quickly, I'll try not to bore you with too many technical details, but there are some important points to point out about mapping inundation and the data inputs used. The first 2 data inputs, the Corps sea level change projections and the NOAA tide gauge data, those 2 are used to calculate the amount of projected sea level rise. I'll talk a little bit more about the Corps projections on our next slide. But like I said before, the Corps projection uses NOAA tide gauge data from around Florida to calculate sea level rise projections. As you can see in this little map with the green arrows, each one of these green arrows represents a NOAA tide gauge, and this data supplies us with regional water levels and regional sea level trends, which also incorporate vertical land movement, so we can calculate relative rates of sea level rise. And these little green arrows indicate sea level rise the sea level is rising at each one of these stations. The last data input in mapping inundation is a digital elevation model, and that is where we extract low-lying elevations that are vulnerable. So this graph is a larger view of the one that was shown on the previous page, and it shows the results of calculating sea level change projections at Key West using the 3 rates of sea level rise from the Corps. So on the bottom, that blue straight line is the low or the historic rate of sea level rise. And this is just what has been observed. This low rate does not incorporate any accelerating factors of sea level rise, such as glacial melt or ocean warming. Now the red and the purple curves, the red is the intermediate rate of rise and the purple is the high rate of rise, both of which do incorporate some acceleration of sea level rise. So just looking at this curve for Key West in particular, at 2050, what you see is a range of sea level rise from 0.13 meters to about a half a meter. And in inches, that's about 5 inches to 1.7 feet. And when you go all the way out to 2100, what you get is about a quarter of a meter to over 1.5 meters, so about 9 inches to over 5 feet. And these three rates from the Corps are pretty consistent with what the other research out there on sea level rise projections are. NOAA has released an even higher rate of sea level rise than our high rate, but these three are sort of intermediate rates. Okay, so mapping inundation. We took the Corps' methods, their equations, we took the NOAA data, and essentially what we did is we created hundreds of sea level rise inundation layers. And each of these layers represents a scenario. And when we talk about a scenario, that means a region, a year, a projection, and a tidal datum. So the region we mapped them statewide and for each FDOT district. The decades, we mapped from 2040 to 2100. We actually mapped from 1992 to 2100, but you don't really start seeing significant inundation until 2040. The projection levels, like I said, those are the low, intermediate, and high that I just showed from the last graph. And the tidal datums, we mapped the inundation on top of 5 different tidal datums. The ones that most planners will use is mean high or high water or mean sea level. And in addition, we created bathtub models, and then we also created models of inundation that were hydrologically connected. So this is just a quick example of inundation layer. This is a subset of Clearwater Airport along Little Tampa Bay. This represents about 1 meter of inundation. So using the Corps' method, using their high curve at 2060, mean high water. And the areas in blue are the results of the inundation model with the hydroconnectivity filter. So this represents elevations that are either directly connected to the ocean, or the bay in this case, or directly connected to a conduit like a river. The areas in yellow are the results of the bathtub inundation model. So they represent low-lying but isolated inundated areas. Both of these model results are really important for planning. So we ran both of these, and we offer both of those on our website for download. So after we created those hundreds of inundation layers, we then intersected them with transportation layers to get a sense of what were going to be the vulnerable transportation infrastructure in the state. We used roadways, rails, rail freight connectors, airports, seaports, and then we focused not on every decade, but just certain planning horizons, so 2040, 2060, 2080, and 2100. And the outputs from this is lots more GIS data identifying the at-risk facilities, and then also noting the approximate miles or the area affected or inundated. So, so our phase 1 goals were to map inundation and then also develop a planning tool. When we started getting into developing the planning tool, we realized it wasn't just really one tool, and that one tool really doesn't fit all. So we ended up creating a tool set. The first tool in the tool set is the map viewer, which is used to visualize the areas of inundation and the affected infrastructure. And there's no technical expertise needed for this, no GIS software. All you need is a web browser and an internet connection, and you can get a sense of the inundation in your area. The second part of the tool set is the actual GIS data layers. So if you have GIS software and some GIS expertise, then you can download this data and go ahead and intersect it with your own local infrastructure to get a sense of what's vulnerable in your community. And the third part of our tool set is a really cool calculator. It's a tool for ArcMap where you can create your own inundation layers. And for this, you do need GIS software, and you do need someone with GIS expertise. So now I'm going to be an extremely brave person and try to give you a live demo. And hopefully the technology gods are with me today. First off, this is our website. Vivian is distributing it with the webinar, sls.geoplan.ufl.edu, the Sea Level Scenario Sketch Planning Tool. If you go to the View Maps page, you can go ahead and and view the map viewer for your area. We do have the map viewers broken up by FDOT district because it's so much data, it was too much to put into one statewide viewer. I've already got District 5 opened up, and I'm already zoomed into Satellite Beach. We've been working with Satellite Beach, this tiny municipality on the beach who's really trying to do some adaptation planning for their area. Quickly, I'll give a little overview and demo. Up here in the top left, just to give you a lay of the land, these are the map contents which show you the data layers that are available in the viewer. Underneath that is a fun little tool, the time lapse, which steps you through inundation over time periods. Up in the top center are particular tools that you can use on the map viewer, and I'll go into some of those. On the right, just some base maps. You can change your base map if you'd like. I like to keep it on imagery with labels. And on the far right are just some map navigation tools, zoom in, zoom out, pan, and there. The first thing I'd like to show is the sea level rise time lapse, just to give an overview of what inundation is going to look like. And I'll go ahead and choose the high projection, and I'll hit play. So this is inundation using the CORS method, using the high projection at mean sea level. So this is 2020, 2040. The areas in purple you start to see grow 2060, 2080, and 2100. And just steps you through the inundation. And for Satellite Beach, what we're seeing is that most of the inundation is occurring on the lagoon side where the low elevations are. And on the Atlantic side, they actually have got a decent dune system and higher elevations. So most of their planning is going to be on this western side. The next thing, I'll go ahead and close that out. The next thing I want to show is just some of the map layers that are available. Most of the data is going to be in this District 5 Inundation and Affected Infrastructure folder. And when you open the folder, we've got data organized by decade, by projection, those high, medium, and low, and also by tidal datum. So if we open up 2060 high projection, we'll see two additional folders, mean sea level and mean higher high water. And so what this is telling us that using the CORS projection, their high projection at 2060 at mean sea level, the projected inundation on the ground is 30 inches. If you're to map that on top of mean higher high water, it's 58 inches, and that's a significant difference. Now the Corps does recommend doing planning using mean higher high water, but for here in Satellite Beach on the lagoon side, they're suggesting to use mean sea level because the lagoon doesn't have the same tidal variations as the coastal side. So if we open up this folder, what you're going to see is more data. We'll go ahead and turn this on, and these areas in blue are the areas that are inundated under this scenario, so 30 inches of sea level rise. And what we've got in here are transportation layers that we've already intersected with this particular scenario. And so I'll go ahead and turn on a couple. This is RCI, the Road Characteristics Inventory from the Florida Department of Transportation's database of transportation facilities. And what you'll see highlight in red, the off-system facilities, so roads not maintained by FDOT. And then you'll see some areas in turquoise, and those are the roads that are maintained by FDOT, and those ones are affected under this scenario. So I'm going to zoom in really tight here. I'm going to go ahead and look at this turquoise. Examine this turquoise segment of road. And I'm going to open up another one of our tools, View Attributes of Affected Infrastructure. And this takes a couple seconds to load. What it's doing is it's dynamically loading what's in the map view, and it's going to give us a little bit more information about that particular stretch of roadway that was identified as vulnerable. So now this just popped up. It's a little table. You can see that it's South Patrick Drive, and the entire segment of roadway, which I'm zoomed in too close to see the entire segment, is about 5¼ miles. And of that 5¼ miles, a little over half a mile is inundated. This table, I'm not going to zoom in and out because it'll take a little bit of time to load, but as you zoom in and out on the map viewer, this table will dynamically load whatever's in your map view. And you can go ahead and export this to a comma-separated file, which you could then bring into Excel or something to, take a closer look at. I'm going to close that out and then show you what are two more tools. Actually, turn that one back on. There's a little tool, Google Street View tool, which you can use to kind of get a sense of what does that little piece of roadway look like. And you drop the little Google man on the roadway, and then you can get a sense of what this roadway looks like. You could just pan around. You can see some soils. And you can use it just to do a little QA and check on that roadway. Okay. So that's a really quick and dirty overview of these tools. What we really intend them for is to visualize the amount of inundation and potentially at-risk transportation infrastructure under various levels of sea level rise. So, the intent is for people to come in, take a look through the scenarios, try to see if they can match up planning horizons with what we've got in the viewer. And if you want to go deeper, you can go to our website. We've got a download link, and you can download these layers. And you can, like I said before, you can intersect. If you've got GIS personnel on your staff, you can grab these inundation layers and intersect them with your own local infrastructure data. And if you want to go even deeper, you can download our calculator tool for ArcMap. I'm going to flip back to the presentation real quick. So real briefly, we created this inundation surface calculator. It's an add-in tool for ArcMap, and we created it specifically using the CORS method, so you can come in and choose a tide station that you want to build your projection off of. You can choose your year, your decade, the high, intermediate, or low rate from the core. You can choose the tidal datum, and you can input your own DEM and create an inundation surface. Now we do release this calculator with our visual elevation model that we compiled from LIDAR and other sources, but because we are doing stuff at the state and regional scale, it's about 5.4 meter cell size. That's the horizontal cell size. If you've got a DEM that's at a higher resolution and you want to pop it in here and create your own inundation surface, it's a great tool for doing that. Okay, so that was really a summary of what we did for phase 1, and our primary goals for phase 2 are to really enhance the tools, test them, and enhance them. So we've been working with the Federal Highway Climate Resiliency Adaptation Pilots, in particular Hillsborough MPO and Broward MPO, and then, like I said, we've also been working with Satellite Beach, Monroe Beach, and Monroe County, who are doing adaptation planning. And what we're trying to do with them is have them use the tools and then give us feedback, what's been useful, what's not been useful, what would have been really nice to have as you went through your process. So we're actively looking for feedback, and our goal here is to create data products that people can quickly integrate into their planning processes. A couple other things that we're working on, some data enhancements. So how to make the tools more applicable at the regional or local scale. And then we're also trying to tackle the beast of how do we model storm surge and inland flooding in addition to sea level rise. So that's a quick summary of our tools. We created these tools for the Florida Department of Transportation, and we're going to continue enhancing them as part of our ongoing research with the department. It's clear that we need to start incorporating climate risk into our planning processes here in Florida. And planners need the best available data and tools to use in the planning process. So we here at the center, the GeoPlan Center, are committed to providing and distributing the best available data and resources so planners and decision makers can quickly integrate that data into the planning process. Thank you. Now I'll pass it back over. Our next speaker is going to be Tom Beck from DEP.
And this is Vivian. It's going to take us a minute to change control back, but then I'll let Tom know when we're ready.
Vivian, you had two. Is it back over to you?
It's back over to me now, and I'm going to mute Crystal and myself so we don't have background noise. And Tom, you're ready to go.
All right, Vivian, next slide. Thank you. No. So today I want to present some preliminary information on recommendations and strategies in terms of water management, specifically to respond to address sea level rise in Florida. And this is an effort of the Sea Level Rise Work Group, which consists of DEP and Florida's 5 water management districts. Next. So in early 2013, we started discussions with the water management districts, in particular South Florida water management districts. I mean, they were obviously had been involved with in a lot of activities, observations regarding sea level rise in their district, their local governments, and so in August of that year, we had a kickoff meeting at one of their field offices in the Orlando area to begin to discuss our approach on looking at water management issues with regard to sea level rise. After that time, we held 4 teleconferences among the districts based on an outline provided by the South Florida water management districts. These discussions included various aspects of saltwater intrusion, the same various aspects of flood protection, and what adaptation strategies are actually occurring today and what future adaptation strategies might be accomplished in the future. And then last April of this year, we had a final meeting again in the South Florida Water Management District's Orlando field office, and basically started looking at preparing a final report for sea level rise strategies with regard to water management issues. Next. Our proposed report, I mean, this is a kind of a sketch outline of what our report would consist of. Of course, we need a background section, laying out what the current state of global and Florida sea level rise data and that sort of thing. What's our scope and objectives, and then we have a section in our report, revising it, it's being drafted, that deals with each water management district. Each of the 5 water management districts has a section in which they talk about sea level rise, how they're addressing or not addressing, is it occurring or not occurring in their individual districts. And then there's a section about some of DEP's programs in terms of sea level rise. Our Florida Coastal Office, administers 41 aquatic preserves, 3 national estuarine research reserves, and a marine sanctuary with in the Keys with NOAA. And so there's a lot of studies and monitoring of sea level rise, on habitat, of course sea level rise itself, how much is it occurring, and then water quality collections, including salinity collections. Our beach nourishment program at DEP was also involved, and again they've been working with the Corps of Engineers and looking at the future potential effects on beach erosion in our beautiful beaches, how much future costs might be if there's more erosion from sea level rise, how much that's going to, additional costs that might be, projecting in the future. We also will be coming up with kind of various types of strategies, long-term and short-term. What can we do in the short term to implement some of our strategies, which ones make sense for the short term. And then the report will end with conclusions and references. I think at this point in time our report, again, we're doing heavy-duty revision right now, but It'll probably be finalized sometimes later this fall. Next, Vivian. Generally, what are some of the water management concerns that have been identified by the districts and DEP? Well, first of all, it has a statewide potential to affect our water supply, which is one of the main missions of my office in the water management district. Flood control, water quality, and, our water resources and natural systems. Sea level rise, of course, has and can affect our coastal wells and our flood control infrastructure. And as I mentioned before, it can affect our important coastal resources, including our world-class beaches and our Everglades, our national treasure Everglades system. Next. Now, for a decade or so, we've actually, the water management districts in Florida, working with DEP, have been adapting to sea level rise, and for other reasons. But we've been aggressively promoting alternative water supply development. I think most of you know Florida obtains almost all of its water supply from groundwater, potable water supply. And we've been aggressively looking at other sources of water, including using, more efficiently using treated wastewater, reclaimed water, going down deeper into Florida's aquifers and where it's brackish water there, but we can treat that with RO types of plants, and then looking at surface water sources to provide additional sources of water supply. Starting in 2004, with the Water Protection and Sustainability Program, the legislature began funding alternative water supplies projects around the state. That funding ended in 2009. There's still money left in the fund, but the recession kind of did it in. Of course, there's consideration, I think, in the next couple of sessions of looking at funding alternative water supply projects again. 389 such projects were funded, and I think once these projects are all completed, about 700 million gallons per day will be produced from these projects. So again, we need to continue to diversify to make Florida more resilient to sea level rise and to climate variability, which occurs very rapidly on our peninsula. We have, of course, lots of natural oscillations, our El Nino oscillation, our multidecadal oscillation, which causes great change in natural variability in our climate in Florida. Next. We're also aggressively promoting water conservation. We need to do better, but obviously we need to ensure that the water supplies that we're using will last longer. And as you can see, over the last 15 years, we have decreased both gross and residential per capita water use by 21% and 16% respectively. And then, again, another adaptation approach that, of course, the state is working on is Everglades restoration. And, of course, by directing more water flows to the south, increasing storage throughout the Everglades, we will mitigate the adverse effects of sea level rise and saltwater intrusion, which, of course, is encroaching on the southern part of the Everglades. Next. And what are some of the strategies, the preliminary strategies that we're considering? The first thing we need to do is we need to determine where we're having saltwater intrusion around the state from sea level rise. The South Florida Water Management District already has an excellent mapping system for saltwater intrusion. Parts of Southwest Florida Water Management District and St. John's are also have monitoring systems in portions of their region for looking at saltwater intrusion due to sea level rise. We need to, currently there is a a saltwater monitoring work group that has produced a network of wells, monitoring wells throughout the state. Of course, we're monitoring for all kinds of water quality parameters, but we're beginning to adapt that and locate those wells as part of that network that can be used for mapping saltwater intrusion throughout the state. We need to determine where the gaps are statewide, and then look at producing more monitoring wells to produce that sort of data. Of course, we need to establish the methodology for doing this. What parameters are we monitoring for? What time of year are we collecting the data? How often, and that sort of thing. So that's one, I think, short-term effort that we're currently working on to set that statewide monitoring system up. And then you heard previous speakers that, again, the work group, of course, is using the Army Corps of Engineers projections out of a dozen or so entities out there. We too believe that their projections, for various reasons, are the ones to use. But this strategy would take those projections and conduct saltwater intrusion modeling for 20-year, 50-year scenarios to identify impacts, coastal wells, flood control structures. Most of those flood control structures, of course, occur in the South Florida Water Management District, which has an altered areas, canals and that sort of thing, and lots of coastal infrastructure. The 20-year scenarios, because our regional water supply plans that are developed by the water management districts and reviewed by DEP go out 20 years. They have 5-year updates. And then the 50-year scenario is what the Corps has been using in their civil works projects like beach renourishment projects and creating various types of coastal infrastructure. They're looking at what are the projections for 50 years in terms of those addressing those types of activities. Another recommendation is conducting so-called hydrodynamic studies in coastal areas to identify storm surge impacts under various sea level rise scenarios. There's currently a study going on. The St. Johns River Water Management District has a contract with the University of Central Florida to begin to look at how sea level rise will cause further storm surge inland, increase flooding durations because of greater inland storm surges and that sort of thing. So I think we all need to consider, we've got these storm surge models, but to what degree has sea level rise been used to address storm surge in those models? Next. And then, one of the other things we need to do is look at, adaptive risk management, look at which resources, which infrastructure is most vulnerable, and then prioritize our funding to address, those most vulnerable resources and infrastructure. State agencies, need to also collaborate on a more regular basis, participate in various types of meetings, such as the Florida Climate Alliance, the Florida Climate Institute, and regularly engage in these types of issues, obtaining the latest research, documentation, obtaining best practice documents. The DEO, you heard Dan talk about the focus group that they've established for some time. And there's a subgroup to that it consists of public agencies, and we began to engage and collaborate under that scenario. But I think those focus group efforts by DEO can be used to create this regular engagement by state agencies and, of course, private sector, nonprofits, various levels of government, and so on. Next. Just, they're not here today. And I just wanted to put a plug in for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. They too are addressing sea level rise, and in 2012 they produced an action plan which has as the main theme throughout the chapter sections and highlighted is one of the major threats to Florida from effects of long-term environmental changes. You can find that action plan on their website, and I believe they're considering updating that action plan in 2016, 2017, something like that. Next. And then lastly, I've taken all the information from all the agencies and water management districts, and I've tried to organize it by issue, such as community resilience, the environment, water supply, and public health. And as you can see, below each of those issue areas is a list of agencies, both state and federal, that are being involved in addressing the various issue items under the larger issue areas. But I just wanted to show you, kind of bring it all together as to what the Water Management District and state are doing to address sea level rise. And that's all I have. And let me turn it over to Meredith Jagger with the Department of Health.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Meredith Jagger. Can you hear me? Okay, there are my slides. Excellent. So I would like to thank 1,000 Friends of Florida for this opportunity to present today, and I would also like to extend my thanks to Richard Fetchick, who's now at the Department of Economic Opportunity, who helped prepare this presentation. Next slide, please. So I am the program manager of the Florida Building Resilience Against Climate Effects, or BRACE program. We are funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Climate Ready States and Cities initiative. And we're working to implement a framework that CDC has developed. Our work includes collecting hazard-sensitive health data and modeling future disease burdens, which can be used ultimately to develop and implement health adaptation plans. That's fine. Florida is one of 16 states and 2 cities that's currently funded to do this work. And again, the CDC has developed this framework. It's 5 steps, which is really designed to help public health agencies incorporate the best available atmospheric science into routine practice and disease surveillance. And again, the ultimate goal is planning. So we're kind of starting, this is a 4-year program currently, and we are about at our halfway point. And we're kind of currently between step 1 and into step 2. So we've already started looking at forecasting impacts and assessing vulnerabilities, which I'll be sharing work on today. Then we're moving forward to project the disease burden into the future. Using that excellent science, the point is to look at public health interventions that have been tested elsewhere, see what interventions may be available from other kind of areas and apply them towards weather variability, and then ultimately look at an adaptation planning process. Evaluation is listed as the 5th step, but it's kind of an ongoing throughout the entire process. Next slide, please. So our work to date, we're actually framing in terms of 6 or 7 different hazards depending on how you look at them, including sea level rise, but also looking at hurricanes and other tropical storms, including a storm surge and wind hazard areas that have different geographic impacts. Also looking at inland flooding, extreme heat, drought, and wildland fires, in addition to sea level rise. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about our sea level rise work next. Okay, so the sea level rise can directly and indirectly impact human health and public health systems. However, next, quantifying direct associations between retrospective health data, specifically health outcomes and sea level rise in Florida is challenging. So storm surge can be used as a proxy. So if we look at impacts after hurricanes or tropical storms, we are looking at food and waterborne disease and injury related to storm surge in our hurricane analysis, but for sea level rise, next. We are also considering assessing critical sanitation infrastructure, which can really help quantify potential risks. So today I'm going to be talking more about critical infrastructure. Next. So the possible effects of sea level rise on human health are varied and wide-ranging, going from critical infrastructure damage, looking at hospitals, transportation routes to hospitals, kind of what we focused on so far earlier in the presentation, but we're also concerned about the release of biological or chemical pollutants, changes in distribution and habitats for disease vectors like mosquitoes, aerosolized marine toxins, harmful algal blooms, and then longer term looking at food and water contamination or insecurity, population displacement, and all the way to impacts on mental health. Next. So when we look at the scientific literature, there is actually very limited research available looking at the direct short and long-term effects of sea level rise, specifically on human health. There's one study from Micronesia in 2007 where they had 2 times in one day an inundation event that was not connected to a storm or a tsunami, but where several islands were completely flooded with seawater, and the health impacts were really nutritional, looking at loss of primary crops, looking at coastal erosion and saltwater intrusion into drinking water supplies. Next. There's also been a study out of Bangladesh in the Bay of Bengal where here seasonal changes in salinity of primary drinking water was increasing the risk of hypertension in pregnant women. So this increase in salinity was enough that during the strains of pregnancy, they were seeing more hypertension in previously healthy women, and this association was seasonally dependent. During the dry season, the water was higher salinity. In the wet season, where there was more freshwater availability, they didn't see the same hypertension increases. Next. But most studies really group sea level rise in with other weather variability events, and so it's really hard to pinpoint sea level rise specific health outcomes. Next. So the work that the BRACE program has done started with a vulnerability assessment, which was a spatial analysis of future hazards and the intersection of these hazards with social and medical vulnerability. It was completed in conjunction with the University of South Carolina Hazard and Vulnerability Research Institute. And this report, which is quite lengthy, is currently available from the Department of Health website. And it looks at, it takes a statewide perspective. You know, obviously in a paper report, the maps are dynamic, but there is also a GIS tool that is associated with this analysis, which will be made available shortly. Next. So one of the 2 measures of vulnerability that we looked at was social vulnerability, and this reflects the characteristics of social groups that influence the capacity to prepare for and respond to environmental threats. Next. So the Social Vulnerability Index uses variables from the U.S. Census and include race, ethnicity, measures of SES, gender, age, renter versus ownership status, family structure, etc. Next. So this is a map of the Social Vulnerability Index for Florida, and areas in the darker red are census tracts that have elevated social vulnerability. So you can kind of see here that there's unequal distribution around the state. And next. So the first area that I kind of want to highlight is in the southeast part of the state, from North Miami-Dade through Broward and into Palm Beach counties. Here there are tracts with 30 to 86% of the population living in high vulnerability. The second area is along the I-4 corridor in Hillsborough to Orange County. I think my animation is slightly off here, but that's fine. So I-4 corridor The third cluster is in southwest Florida in Lee and Collier counties, and then the last is in western Pasco County, Hernando, Citrus, Marion, Lake, that area. The main driver of vulnerability for the first three areas is actually high occupancy households. And for the final area in western Pasco County, that area is actually older adults, which is a driver of vulnerability. So even in these different regions that we're considering socially vulnerable, there are different measures of vulnerability that would be the most important to consider in those areas. Next. The second index that we were looking at is a medical vulnerability index, and this specifically looks at health need and inherent medical vulnerability independent of social factors. Next. The data are collected from sources that are very broad-ranging, including Department of Health vulnerable population profiles, Florida law enforcement, Florida Agency for Healthcare Administration. This includes 61 indicators that can be broadly classified into 4 groups: physical health needs, psychological health needs, healthcare access, and health system capacity. Next. So the medical vulnerability map looks different than the social vulnerability map because some of these measures are only available at the county level, so it's slightly less refined in its ability to determine social vulnerability. But again, the patterns of vulnerability across the state do vary, and it tends to be focused in rural areas which would have lower healthcare access. But there are some urbanized areas along in the state that have high MEDV, such as small census tracts that might not be easily identifiable on this map. Next. So Brevard County has 27 tracts. Next. And Hillsborough County has 85 tracts with high MEDV scores that might not be, again, immediately discernible on this map. Next. So one negative factor may not be problematic in the long run when we're looking at the intersection of a hazard and a vulnerability. Next. But places with higher risk and higher vulnerability are more likely to see adverse outcomes. So the analysis of the intersection between the hazard mapping and the vulnerability analysis really helps us identify areas where the hazard itself should be the main focus, areas where underlying social demographics have the biggest opportunity for positive outcomes, or areas where a combination of hazard and social adaptation or mitigation practices can maximize positive outcomes in the future. Next. So for sea level rise, the vulnerability mapping that we did was calculated using best available digital elevation data. Areas that were hydrologically connected to the shore were considered at risk under 3 different scenarios for 2100 compared to 1990. We used a low 28.5 centimeter, mid 66.9 centimeter, and high 126.3 centimeters, which is approximately 1, 2, or 4 feet scenarios. South Florida and other coastal communities throughout the state are at risk of at the high sea level rise scenario. And overall, approximately 590,000 people are currently living in 28 counties that are directly at risk of extreme or high risk under this high scenario. However, we're all aware that in the long term, the sustained and ongoing impacts of sea level rise on infrastructure could damage and influence a population that's much larger than those that are currently living in these census tracts. Next. So here is one of the intersection maps looking at this high sea level rise scenario and social vulnerability. The areas in the dark purple or the dark red are ones where there have that intersection of both the hazard and the vulnerability. And currently there are approximately 125,000 individuals who are considered socially vulnerable who are also at extreme or high risk to sea level rise in Florida. Next. When we look at medical vulnerability, again, the areas in dark purple or dark red are the ones where there's the biggest potential overlap between the high sea level rise scenario and medical vulnerability. Currently, there are approximately 55,000 individuals who are considered medically vulnerable living in extreme or high sea level rise census tracts. Next. So when we're thinking about health outcomes, again, like I said before, quantifying retrospective data and health outcomes is very challenging. So we chose to look at two different indicators of health that are related to infrastructure. So the first indicator that I have here is household source of drinking water. And the measure here is the percent of non-public drinking water source. So this is a drilled well or a dug well or some other primary source of non-public drinking water. Please note that these data are old. On the 1990 census, households were asked primary source of drinking water and primary source of sewage disposal. The census has not updated these questions since, and we are in the process of collecting much more specific and current data of household source of drinking water, but at present, this is what we have best available. So this is at the county level, and counties that are in the darkest blue are counties that have where less than between 62 and 84% of households do not have public drinking water. So the darker colors are counties that have less access to public drinking water. Next. So when we look at the intersection between sea level rise scenario, the high scenario, and water source, you can see here that the households without public water are symbolized with the darker, larger circles. And again, the sea level rise scenario is the blue that's on the map. Next. So there are a lot of counties that are vulnerable to sea level rise in South Florida. As we know, they tend to have very good public water infrastructure. So we're kind of focusing in the northern panhandle where there's a lot of overlap between some sea level rise and low public water access. Next. But there are tracts in Citrus, DeSoto, Levy, Marion, and Nassau counties that are most at risk. Next. So here are counties where there's at least one tract that is in the extreme sea level rise scenario and that highest percentage without public water. Next. Next. And I just wanted to highlight those because, again, on this map, those dark colored tracts are a little bit hard to see. Next. So the other indicator of health that we're considering is source of household sewage disposal. So here is the percentage of non-public sewage disposal. So that could be septic tank or cesspool or other, again, as collected by the 1990 census at the county level. So counties that are in the darkest brown color have over 75% of households reported not having a public sewer. Next. So again, this map overlays the sewer prevalence and the sea level rise scenario. Next. So here I did want to highlight that in southern Florida, 51% of Monroe County households reported that they were not connected to a public sewer. So this is a county that is at extreme risk under the highest sea level rise scenario and where there is the potential, depending on how many households are using non-public sewer, for health outcomes in the event of inundation. Next. Next. And again, this intersection of the hazard and the vulnerability is present along the Gulf Coast. Next. And there are, again, several tracts that are at extreme risk in kind of central Florida. Next. Next. So my summary points here again, sea level rise can directly and indirectly impact human health, but looking at this retrospectively with Florida health data are very challenging. We are using storm surge as a proxy in a separate analysis, but for sea level rise in particular, we are focusing on critical infrastructure to help quantify potential risk. Next. And here is my contact information. Thank you all very much. Going to turn it back to Vivian, I guess, now for questions, correct?
Yes, thank you, Meredith. We really appreciate it and appreciate everybody's presentations. We're going to open it up for questions in a minute. I did want to say that 1,000 Friends of Florida is a membership organization and not-for-profit, and we hope that you will consider supporting us. You can check on our website at 1000friendsoflorida.org/donate now and find out information about how you can support us. I wanted to refresh your memories on questions. Again, you have a chat box. If you click on the little sign next to it, you can put questions in here. We encourage you to do that. All of our speakers are on the line to answer any questions that you might have. If you can keep your questions succinct, and if you are asking a specific person a question, if you could indicate that. The materials box is here, and I've gotten a message from several people that it's not showing up, so I do apologize. I did send out in the chat links to the various sites, so if you don't have the materials box, please look in the chat box and you'll find links to some of the various sites that were mentioned. As a quick reminder, as questions are coming in, we do have a series of upcoming webinars that we encourage you to consider attending. October 8th, another Planning for Sea Level Rise on Broward County, Complete Streets in November, Greenways in December, another one in January on legal issues facing Florida. In February, Victor Dover is going to be speaking on his new book, Street Design, The Secret to Great Cities and Towns. And in March, we're going to be doing our legislative update. It feels like we just finished our last one. We did get a question about the PowerPoints being available. You can find our PowerPoint by going to our website at 1000friendsoflorida.org. And there's a column on the right-hand side that says what's new, and the top item talks about the PowerPoint for this webinar, and you can click on it there. Again, I apologize that we had problems with it on the messaging site. I'm going to take a minute to unmute all the other speakers, and we'll start answering your questions. Thank you. Okay, we're getting a lot of feedback, so I'm going to turn the volume down. You may wish to adjust the volume on your own computer if you're having problems, as that might be a way to control it. If you are having problems hearing and you've adjusted, let me know and we'll turn it up. But at the present, this is the best we can do right now. We see a lot of questions coming in. Let's start asking them. Let me see what the first one is. We have a question. I think this would be for Crystal, and I'm not sure if it's something that you can answer, but has the real estate community started looking at the FDOT visualization tool to determine property values?
Good question. The short answer is I don't.
Okay. Crystal, I'm having a lot of trouble hearing you. Could you maybe turn your speaker up?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is I don't know. We haven't had any feedback from the real estate community indicating that they've used this, but there are a number of map viewers out there that are online and free and available for people to sort of look at what possible inundation is going to be under various scenarios. So I would imagine that yes, at some point the real estate community is out there looking at these viewers. If they've been looking at ours in particular, I'm not sure.
Okay. Another question, and this is probably for anybody to address. It says 100 plus years is a very long-term forecasting period. Has such long-term planning been used in other areas other than sea level rise? Does anybody have an answer to address that issue? Crystal, I guess I'll start with you. Do you have any?
They're trying to do something similar, with sector plans, trying to forecast out that long. For sea level rise, I think it's pretty well accepted that when you go out 100 years, we're not as certain of the projections. But when you're looking at investing money in major infrastructure projects like a bridge that could last 75 years, 80 years, you kind of have to use the best available data to do projections out to that level.
Okay. Does anybody else have any answer to that? Meredith, do you have any response to that?
This is Meredith, partly because of the way we've been directed by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, but all the work that the BRACE program is doing, looking at projections for hazards that include sea level rise, but others as well, we are looking at that very long time horizon out to 2100, which is challenging and new for public health, but is what we are currently doing.
Okay. This is Vivian. We're getting a lot of background noise, so I'm going to turn my speaker down slightly to see if that helps control it. If you have difficulty hearing the speakers, please message me and we'll try to turn it back up again. We've got another question about what is the Kennedy Space Center's vulnerability to sea level rise. Does anybody have any perspectives on that?
This is Crystal. I haven't looked at the Kennedy Space Center specifically in particular. I'm looking at the map bureau right now for 2060. It doesn't look good for them, but I would encourage you to go online and look at the District 5 map bureau to get a sense of what the inundation is going to look like on Kennedy Space Center. We've got 2040 to 2100.
Does anybody else have any information on the Kennedy Space Center? Okay. We have another question, and I know I can partially answer it, but I don't think anybody here can fully answer it. The question is the Department of State Division of Historical Resources starting to plan for impacts to cultural resources? I do know that several years ago, 1,000 Friends of Florida was contracted by the Department of State to do several studies on disaster planning for historic resources. And those were more specifically related to natural disasters, but I'm sure some of the provisions in those studies would also relate to sea level rise. It included the emergency management process and how to have historical resources integrated into that, as well as specific strategies to build resilience in historic resources. And those are available on 1000 Friends website under publications. I'm not aware of what else they might be doing. Charles or anybody else, is anyone aware of what the Division of Historical Resources might be doing?
This is Charles. No, I'm sorry, I don't have any updated information.
Okay. We have a question. Does FDOT have plans for funding strategies to address sea level rise impacts on DOT facilities? And Crystal, I know you are hired to just do this mapping. I don't know if you can address that question or not.
Yeah, I can't. Unfortunately, I can't address that question. Yeah, we're the technical people, not the policy people in this case. So,
okay. We have another question on what is the status of the coastal construction setback line. And Charles, I was wondering if that was something that maybe you could address.
No, I don't think Tom either. It needs to be the DEP coastal staff probably that could answer that.
Okay.
That's right. I can find out and be glad to get back with you, Vivian.
Okay, that'd be great.
Vivian, this is Charles. One quick thing on that previous question. You know, the East Central Florida Corridor Task Force that's sort of a pilot project for the DOT Corridor Planning Initiative. has listed sea level rise as a consideration for future projects in these proposed corridors. So I think, you know, there is an awareness that DOT has about that. It doesn't address the funding, of course, but I think that is front and center as a consideration for different transportation facility improvements, at least for that area in particular.
Okay, thank you. We have a question for Tom Beck. What specifically is Florida doing to ramp up water conservation through recapture, monitoring, and water use permits that adjust for saltwater intrusion and groundwater loss?
Well, we've been promoting along with the water management districts very aggressive conservation approaches in various ways. If you're interested in more details on that, you can look at our Central Florida Water Initiative. There we're looking at our water needs for 2035, and we're coming up with, at this point in time, about a savings of at least 42 million gallons per day during that time frame. We're working with industry, public water supply folks, and agricultural folks. And anyway, there's a myriad of ways. I know just in the ag industry alone, we're looking at over 20 types of pest management practices. Public water supply, again, has a number of ways that they're projecting how they can save water in the future.
Okay, thank you. We have another question about sharing data on how the state is projected to be affected by sea level rise, including percentage of the state projected to be underwater and how many feet underwater. I would imagine, Crystal, that depends on which rate you use and what area of the state you're talking about.
Exactly. That's we haven't crunched those numbers. That's something that we'd like to do, but it's a little bit of a challenge right now because we're using scenarios, and there's a lot of scenarios out there, and it depends, what time period you choose. It depends on which area of the state you choose, because depending on which area of the state, it's a different tide gauge. Each tide gauge has a different sea level trend, and that goes into calculating how much level rise is out there. Now, that being said, I would probably point you to Climate Central. They've put out some excellent documents trying to summarize some of these statistics for the states. Now, keep in mind, they're choosing particular scenarios, but they have put out some good fact sheets and information if you would just want a quick overview on how much of the state is projected to be affected.
And here's another question for you, Crystal. This person writes, in our area, FDOT is considering several routes for rerouting a major highway in our area. Are you aware if I guess the regional offices are using the sketch planning tool at this time, or is it not at an implementation stage yet?
That's correct. It's not in an implementation phase yet. Right now we're in the research phase, and they haven't set any policies in terms of you must use this, so unfortunately right now they might be using it ad hoc, but not as their fiscal planning process.
Okay. Tom, this might be one that you could address. Will you be looking at strategies for physical adaptation approaches and planning?
Physical adaptation. Again, we're looking on a broad district-wide basis in terms of physical adaptation. We'd be looking at infrastructure adaptations, which would include moving wells, which could include moving wells, addressing flood control structures, modifications, salinity gate, adapting them to better be able to address salinity issues, that sort of thing. But otherwise, I'm not sure.
And this is Charles. That may be something that Dan, would cover through DEO. I know they do have that particular aspect. Of course, that's a voluntary program, and on top of everything else, I think the authority for imposing those kind of regulations would lie with the local governments at this point.
Okay. Dan, if you're on the line, you do have yourself muted if you are on the line and could maybe address that issue. The question was, are you looking at strategies for physical adaptation approaches in planning?
We are working with governments across the state, and we'll continue to work with local governments across the state to identify opportunities, guidance, and technical assistance that will support the priorities that they identify to meet their individual needs when it comes to the built environment and also natural resources.
Okay, thank you. This might be a better question for our legal webinar in January, but it's asking, when will the public be made aware of specific properties that will need to be abandoned with sea level rise predictions? And will there be something to identify a useful life of properties? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Vivian, this is Charles. I think that's going to be one of the specific questions the legal webinar on sea level rise looks at. I mean, that is currently an issue, and it remains unresolved.
Okay. We have a question. Are you aware of any other states that are planning for sea level rise to this degree? And how long has this planning been going on?
Yeah, Vivian, Tom Beck. I don't know how many, but I do have a list of other states and what they are doing to address sea level rise, and I can provide you that.
Okay, what I'll plan to do is Tom has some information, and if other presenters do as well, we'll send you out an email in the next couple of days with links to this information. So, we'll do our best to get this information to you. Was somebody else had a comment on this issue?
Yeah, Vivian, this is Crystal. I would say, the big states I'm aware of are California and New Jersey and Virginia.
Crystal, I'm having a hard time hearing you, and when I turn my speaker up, I get a lot of feedback. Could you maybe turn your speaker up and
Sure.
And re-answer that?
I was going to
Sorry.
say off the top of my head, the other states that I know that have big initiatives are California, New York, New Jersey, and Virginia.
Okay. Are any of you aware of any regional planning councils other than the South Florida Regional Planning Council which is working to address sea level rise and other issues?
Vivian, Tom again, Northeast Florida Regional Planning Council, Ryan Keeple and his folks have looked at various scenarios of sea level rise and how it affects this region.
Okay.
That's the only other one that I'm aware of.
Is anyone else? Oh, go ahead.
This is Charles. I know that several local governments in the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council on their own have joined the Southeast Florida Compact, so they're already starting to make some changes in their comprehensive plans to deal with sea level rise.
I did want to remind everybody that we are conducting a sea level rise survey right now, and you can access it on our website at 1000friendsoflorida.org. If you look on the right-hand side of our landing page, there's what's new, and one of the links is to that survey. So we are trying to gather that information because we're not aware of everything that's going on around the state, and we will be doing a summary report and sharing that probably in another month or so. So if people who are on this call are aware of any efforts at the municipal, county, regional planning council, or some other level, please let us know because we're very interested in sharing that information. There's also, I think, some federal activities taking place in the state as well. So we're trying to compile all that information and post it on our site to help communities move ahead on this issue. We've got another question. How will the state handle land ownership issues regarding the rise in mean high tide line? And again, I imagine that might be one of the legal questions, but does anybody have any thoughts on that in the meantime?
Vivian, this is Charles. That came up at a climate panel presentation with the annual meeting of the Florida chapter for American Planning Association, and the fundamental question will be, when for most of the coastal properties in Florida, the ownership line goes out to mean high water. The question is going to be what allowances can be made for private individuals when sea level rises to reclaim out to that mean high water mark. That answer is forthcoming maybe from a lot of different sources, but interestingly, the lawyers on that panel suggested this right now was going to be something the courts decided.
Okay. Again, our webinar in January, we have assembled a team of attorneys, and we are going to be trying to address legal ramifications of sea level rise, including questions like this. So we encourage you to sign up for that one when it's ready, and we will go through your questions and try to make sure that at least somebody's going to be addressing them during that presentation. We have had some answers come into some questions regarding what other states are doing sea level rise planning and how long. We got a response that Maryland has been addressing this issue since 2008. In terms of other regional planning councils, two different responders. One said the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council is now working on sea level rise, and another person said the Southwest Florida Regional Planning Council is working on sea level rise with Jim Beaver. We do not have any other questions, and at this point I don't believe, I'm looking through them to see if there's anything else. Does anybody have any concluding comments they'd like to make, any of our presenters? If not, we'd really like to thank you for joining us for this webinar. We have done a series of 3 webinars. Again, next month is going to be Broward County, and January is going to be legal resources, because when we did our questionnaire in the spring on what topics, we got a lot of respondents back saying they wanted to find out more about sea level rise. Again, the Broward County one in October is going to focus on more of a case study kind of solutions about what Broward County is doing at the regional, county, and municipal level to address these issues. So it's going to be getting a little bit more into the local planning issues associated with it. And we encourage you to sign up for that webinar. Charles, did you have any concluding comments you'd like to make?
No, I think, it's great to see this level of interest. I think there'll be, some good materials that'll be posted on our website that we want to invite people to go back and look at. And I think this is, one of the bigger issues that we're going to face over the next 50 years. So it's going to demand a lot of attention and innovative thinking on how best to deal with it.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank all of our speakers for doing a really outstanding job of making people aware of the resources that are available to help plan for this issue. Again, it's going to be an issue that many communities are needing to address, so we're trying to, help identify what resources and information is out there. Again, we encourage you to sign for our upcoming webinars. You will receive an email with a link to a questionnaire, and we encourage you to give us feedback on this webinar and give us information on other topics you'd like us to cover. And with that, I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their outstanding jobs, and thank everybody for joining us. We'll be back again in a month. Thank you. Goodbye.